Welcome everyone to our July webinar hosted by ISM New Jersey. My name is Kathy Perna and I am the Executive Director. I would like to do a nice welcome to our New Jersey members, Houston, Denver, Las Vegas, and those from New York State and any other locations throughout the United States that are joining us today. Please be sure to use the Q&A tab during the program for any questions you may have for our speaker. Today's program will be on maximize cost savings by enhancing supplier relationships. And our speaker for today is Joe Lazzerini. He's a PMP, consultant and logistics category subject matter expert. Joe is a consultant within Corcentric's Source to Pay consulting group, contributing to a large-scale sourcing engagements focused on delivering results in the logistics spend category. Joe leads Corcentric's logistics sourcing practice, but has an extensive experience in a variety of other categories. Previously, Joe was a project manager for a logistics consulting company. He worked closely with one of the largest group purchasing organizations in the world, along with many of the private equity companies they service. He was the main point of contact for a new direct spend category, less than truckload, for the GPO. In addition to logistics and sourcing consulting, Joe has a professional experience in accounting, marketing, purchasing, sales, and HR. Joe has a BA from Southern Illinois University and is a certified project management professional, achieving the PMP title in December of 2010. We always like to include a fun fact. So the fun fact about Joe is he created, designed, maintained, and updated his own social networking website. He taught himself how to manipulate HTML code to create a website for a community of artists and musicians. To protect the art and to protect himself, he actually created an LLC under which the site operated. Please give a warm welcome to Joe.
Thank you, Kathy, and good afternoon or good morning to all of you who have joined us today. I appreciate the intro, like I said, Kathy. And so today what we are going to talk about is this idea of maximizing cost savings by enhancing supplier relationships. I will kind of go into a little bit of an intro about myself and then how that ties into Corcentric and how that we as a company will try to apply all these thoughts and ideas in ways that go beyond just your typical relationship with a supplier. The idea of where you can get your cost savings from, how you can achieve them, and where in your relationship with your suppliers can cost savings measures happen. So real quickly, to kind of, again, a little bit more about myself, an experienced consultant in a logistics category, subject matter expert. I head our logistics category at Corcentric. Corcentric ourselves, we are a sourcing and procurement consulting company. So a lot of what we have to do is working with your procurement and sourcing departments or challenges in other departments, and having the ability to tie all that through with the categories themselves and how you have to make sure that you get synergy across the board within a company. You know, we do run large scale sourcing engagements. You know, it can, again, variety of categories across the board as a company, but again, I tend to focus the majority of my efforts in the logistics space. And so I will try my best to not just always use logistics examples throughout this presentation, because I do understand that there are suppliers in other categories as well. But certainly, you know, that expertise is going to certainly have a kind of a theme throughout this presentation. So with that said, we're going to kind of move through, like I said, just kind of what in general supplier management and relationships mean, what the definition is, and what the kind of just overarching terminologies and definitions, and why, you know, supplier relationships mean so much. And then we're going to go through a specific example of how you can build that relationship or use a tool to be able to strengthen a relationship with not just a supplier, but your entire supplier base, and whether it is in just a specific category, or if it is you know, across many categories, or even if it's just one specific company that you really just think that there's an opportunity to do more with. You could go through an exercise called process mapping, And we will kind of walk through what that is like and what the benefits can be of running through that process. And then I'm going to kind of take all the things that I talked about and show you how it can be applied in a practical manner. A case where if you run through all the things and the thoughts and ideas and everything that I have in the presentation up to that point and actually applied it, then how does that look and what is the result going to be? And the result then turns into the cost reduction negotiations, and it's kind of this is where the dynamic shifts when compared to some other processes or some other ways that somebody might look at a supplier and figure out a way to negotiate cost, figure out ways to save money. A lot of that might seem like it makes sense to do upfront, that if you're looking at a relationship with a supplier right at the beginning, what leverage do you have to negotiate costs across the board? And sometimes that is the right approach, and then there's other times where it's not. So I mean, a new supplier might have a little bit more, they have unknowns that you might not be aware of, and so they might be more hesitant to give you some cost breaks. But then again, they might want the new business, and so they might be more willing. So it depends on category, depends upon the supplier, depends upon whether or not they're the incumbent or not, and what their overall familiarity is with you, because you can go through a process of an RFP all you want, but you really can't get a true idea of what a company has to offer until they get in there and actually start doing the work. So that's kind of, this is the way that we're going to kind of present it today, where the cost reduction negotiations falls on the back end of your supplier management. So kind of getting into a very high level basic introduction to what supplier relationship management is. It's just the discipline of strategically planning for and managing interactions with third-party organizations. So, obviously anything that's supplying goods or services to an organization. The second bullet point is kind of where the key throughout this presentation is going to be. So the idea that in practice, your relationships with your suppliers, it's about creating closer and more collaborative relationships with those key suppliers in order to uncover and realize new value and reduce the risk of failure. And the key word that I like to point out in that sense is value. That again, I'm going to be kind of talking later on about cost itself, but throughout this process, throughout your ability to strengthen your relationship with a supplier, understanding what value you're getting out of that relationship becomes a really critical point. And when you are just looking at the value itself, sometimes it becomes difficult to quantify it in a way, or justify some of the efforts that you've been doing, because at the end of the day, there isn't a number where you could just say, we were spending this, now we're spending this much less, look at the savings that we have. That's not necessarily always going to be the case when you look at value. And that's kind of a key part that we'll also touch on, about how synergy throughout a company and understanding the goals and the ideas that you have throughout every department helps to kind of make everybody on the same page and realize that yes, as a company, you don't want to spend as much money as possible. But at the same time, there are times where just going for low cost isn't going to be the best option for you. And understanding how to capture the value along with additional cost benefits is really kind of the key element to this whole piece. And that factors into when cost savings is that critical driver in supplier selection. How do you then balance that collaborative effort? So this is again where I mentioned that the balance between procurement and other business units, that a lot of times if you're looking at a relationship with a supplier and your procurement department is saying, hey, we need to cut costs this year, and your category that you manage has a lot of spend in it. And a lot of times when you look at large spend categories, those are the easiest ones to look at and identify and say, that looks like the best spot to try to figure out ways to spend less money. Well, that's not always the case. When you start looking at those large spend categories, and again, apologies, I'm already jumping into logistics, but really what you end up having a lot of the time are these other tertiary benefits that a supplier that's in their role might bring to the table that the number doesn't really reflect it. So, there are so many other factors that go in that there's a reason why you selected that supplier. complex categories, it becomes much more difficult to figure out a way to just go with low cost because there's so many other things those suppliers could be doing for you. Low cost, it's really, it can't be your determining factor, but we have to, I'm trying to keep this a little bit more general because not every sourcing category is complex. It's not to say that some other ones are just, really easy to do, but, in general, if you're thinking about trying to buy a ream of paper, it tends to be a ream of paper to a ream of paper, no matter really who you're buying it from. So there could be a little bit more low cost negotiating when you're looking at some of those things. But when it comes to, again, some of these more complex categories that really, really drive your business, and a lot of it would have to do heavily in the supply chain. If you just want to go with low cost, you have the ability to potentially run into problems down the road, which is why, I'm sure I'll say it again throughout this presentation, but a lot of what we're trying to do here throughout the negotiating process and throughout your managing of the expectations of the supplier and having them understand your expectations, but also making sure they understand from your end as well, is that when it's all said and done in some of these really complex spend categories, you're trying to find the best cost and the right cost, not necessarily the low cost, because you're weighing out the cost and the value that you could be getting from that supplier. So a lot of when I try to work with a potential client or a client of ours, we try to make sure that we define that right cost. There is a proper amount of money that you should be spending in that category because you're getting the best service you can, the best value that you could be getting from those suppliers at the right cost. If you're not overpaying for it, but you're getting really truly what you should be spending on that category. And that's a lot of it becomes difficult. It's not as easy to again quantify that or put the metrics in place to understand that. But those are the things that we're trying to work towards to be able to understand how you can really truly get the most out of what supplier you're using. And I had also mentioned earlier about the difference between new suppliers and incumbent suppliers, that different agendas across the board depending upon who they are and what they're doing. That it could be beneficial or detrimental depending upon how you operate as a business once the supplier gets into your network. Whether it be just some of the tactical things that you do as a company, or some of the just difficulties that they didn't really see. There's just a lot that can go wrong, and I will go into a little bit more detail on that a little later on. But that is certainly a factor that that you want to be aware of. And really, what this all boils down to is, again, high-level definitions that we're talking about. But and ultimately, why is supplier management important? And to be just real basic about it, it creates a competitive advantage that you are addressing this in a way that looks at cost, value, efficiency, and so many other ways across the board that you align yourself to be able to have your company aligned in a way that hopefully puts you as an industry leader and as an ability to be collaborative in your network of suppliers or vendors or clients or whomever you're working with, that gives you the most knowledge and the most ability to be able to make your company as top notch as it can be. You are really hopefully getting a leg up on anybody else in your industry because you're using your tools as a true manager of relationships to be able to enhance your ability to communicate, and that drives your overall competitive advantage. So when it comes to supplier relationships, we start looking at a pretty obvious statement that it's critical to a company's success. But oftentimes, both sides of the partnership can kind of become complacent in approaching it as kind of if it's not broke, don't fix it. Like, we're getting what we need on time, we're paying, it doesn't seem to be overly costly, and just the process doesn't have any kinks in it. So might as well just keep on doing what's been going on for however long, years, whatever the case may be. Whereas having a person responsible, and so that last kind of the relationship manager. So in most of these situations, if not all of them, ideally, you have a person within your organization who is responsible for for that relationship with your supplier. And so that person should be always looking ways to improve that relationship, streamline where necessary. You can look at change in costing models, figuring out ways to basically always challenge that status quo, to not become complacent, to always make sure that you are you own that relationship in a way that you actually value what you're getting out of that supplier. And cost again doesn't always just have to be the driver. There's other ways to be more efficient and get more value out of that relationship. And so again, the key piece there is that relationship manager is that if it's not managed on your end as the company, if it's just a supplier out there that you just you pick up a phone and you call somebody and we get our stuff, or it's automated and just nothing really tends to go wrong, then you kind of lose focus of that person or that company, that supplier, vendor, and it doesn't allow you to really figure out ways to improve, because even if it's going well, that doesn't mean you still can't look for a way to improve on that relationship. So when you start looking at how you can enhance that relationship, a lot of what companies think, and I'm not saying that they're wrong in this, but it's often looking at the supplier and figuring out what can you get out of them. What are you doing for me? I pay you money, you do things for me. So if you want my business to stay with you, then you need to be doing things a certain way. And a lot of times what ends up happening is you kind of end up not thinking about yourself, not looking at yourself, and figuring out ways as a company you can change your ways and your processes and procedures and your overall thought process to help build that relationship on your end. So, I mean, that's the very simple question of ask your suppliers what you could be doing better. But, you start diving into it a little bit more and understand that your suppliers are not just your vendors. They could look at them as your partners. It's a mutual relationship, a partnership, if you will. And don't just base it on financial transactions. You look at, how you could build on the trust and the loyalty. Make your suppliers feel like they're part of your business. You can inform them about your processes or new releases of products and promotions, and listen to their concerns and their comments and their feedback to you. And again, build that relationship, at the base level, and not just sit there and hammer home, I need my stuff cheaper, or I need less cost. If you start at the very basic level here of this partnership or relationship, it allows you to have those conversations later, which again, we'll get into. And some of the other things you can start diving into more is, the technology side of things and automation. Investing in supplier management software, kind of keeps your information much more readily available. You can install purchase order management software. Which you can use to create and process track, purchase orders, or other software solutions. Anything you can do to automate that side of things. It's just going to have them view your processes and procedures more optimally than if you are just looking at things kind of unorganized and frustrating on their end. And a part of that also then becomes timely payments, and understanding that they're a company that needs to get paid, and you have payment terms, and making sure that you adhere to those. And there are other tools that can go into play as well. So something like AP automation, it can help you understand the process as you, I guess it will streamline the process. And again, it allows for less hangups on their end when it comes to processing the money. And just so everyone, if we wanted to go into any questions along the way, I'll finish this slide and then I'll kind of take a brief pause to open it up for any early questions, and then we can continue. So after the, your payment situation, it's kind of a build on that relationship piece. But really what you're doing is that you're keeping them regularly informed on your strategy and your plans and where they fit in. How do they fit into your overall network? And it builds on that partner piece. So if you appreciate their work, let them know. If there's something not working for you, also let them know. A stronger, deeper relationship with clear and frequent communication allows it to become much more organic. you really want to like make sure that you share your company roadmap, or your even it could just be something as simple as your division or your department's roadmap. What are your plans for the future, and what do you hope to get out of that with that supplier? So the next one really is understanding that price versus value, which I know I've mentioned several times because that is a big theme of mine that I like to keep hammering home. So, nothing is really better than growing your profits than, getting quality service materials for the right price. If you have the financial flexibility, use it. You can buy in bulk to get better pricing, but, you'll have more stock on your balance sheet. You can arrange to pay a vendor early in order to get a bigger discount, but sometimes it's just better to pay a little bit more because the supplier is giving you a better service, which could end up paying for itself because you need to provide less time to manage them, or because they're trusted to deliver directly to your customer on time. Relationships are important, but you shouldn't just stick with a supplier because you like them. Choose them because they're the most efficient for your business, and then they realize that efficiency of a product, it builds on that value, not just the cost. So the next one, evaluating the risks. Always evaluate the risk, dealing with supplier, especially if you have a complex supply chain. You can always look to ask for references or examples of previous work, years in business, area of expertise, and so on. Obviously that's a little bit more important if they're a newer supplier. But, even if you are dealing with a current supplier that you may not necessarily have had a lot of frequent communication with, ask them to, see if there's anything that they've had to deal with recently that was maybe a crisis and how they handled it. What is their future plans for capacity and their ability to meet your expectations as far as that's concerned. Do they have anything riding in the background that might just end up becoming risky for you on that side of things? We understand in business things do go wrong, but as you try to evaluate your vendor's risk profile, in concert with a good supplier relationship agreement, you can help mitigate those risks. And be ready to deal with emergencies in that partnership, which again is critical because now you start having the less opportunity for any sort of disruption or interruptions to your business or your flow within a supply chain. And I had mentioned earlier about the relationship manager. Really, what that does is how I had previously spoken about. The relationship itself, you have more accountability and stuff like that, but really what ends up happening is that they can also then abide by making sure the whole department has the dedicated the ability to basically follow the rules. Is that you put in place the standard operating procedures for buying and purchasing, and you make sure that your company is following those rules. A lot of the team can sometimes just kind of, maybe not buying from the preferred partner. There's some sort of reason why that they don't like a certain company. And so, that one guy that came in that one time rubbed them the wrong way. And next thing you know, but if you have that person that is making sure that everybody within your organization is following those rules and doing what they're supposed to, it allows you to make sure that the company that should be used is properly being engaged. And, again, that just helps build that trust within that supplier. And really the final piece kind of ties into that a little bit, with your internal alignment. There are some times you can do some research and look at some areas where, that maverick spending and going outside of the normal procurement process, really can, up costs quite a bit. There's a difference between having, a preferred supplier list and then using a procurement system. And again, it's a key matter of structure and buy-in that you yourself can help manage internally, which builds upon your overall, ability to have that relationship with your suppliers. So, with that said, I don't know if there have been any questions that have come in, but I'll kind of take a pause here and see if there's anything that has come through. All right, well, we can maybe revisit if there are any questions that come through during this time. Feel free to send them in, and we can go through them when this is over. We can use the last piece of this hour to answer any questions. So moving along, the next thing that we wanted to kind of talk through, and I mentioned, was part of this whole process about supplier relationships and understanding is you could go through a specific exercise. Where it's called process mapping. So what you end up doing is you sit down with a supplier, or you can even do it internally first, and then sit down with your supplier. And essentially, what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out a way to get the most out of their offering and their services. So really what you're trying to do is, it's basically using a flow chart to illustrate the flow of a process. So you're proceeding from the most macro perspective to the level of detail required to identify opportunities for improvement. Process maps can be applied to anything from travels of an invoice or the flow of materials to the steps of making a sale, or even servicing a product. When you're going through this process, there are a few things that you're really trying to make sure that you're accomplishing. You want to be able to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the suppliers, determine if the correct relationships are in place. So just because a supplier can do something does not mean that they should do it. You could sit there and have a company that has all these different branches and arms and can really take in a lot of your business, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're right for you. They might do well, but your needs are a little bit different, and it's okay to look at other places where you can maybe take part of their business and move it. Now, conversely, you also might have suppliers that are capable of doing great things for your company, but you may not have been aware of them. So this is a chance to kind of put all those on the table and figure out from the beginning to the end, where do you kind of build the puzzle? What makes the most sense for for your suppliers? So it's really a good tool that you could internally look at and sit down and think about a supplier and figure out what they do for you, and what are their capabilities and what do they currently do for you in your network. But then you could bring them into the conversation and sit down at a table with them and say, all right, now a little bit more about us as a company. Here are all the things that we're looking to do. Tell us more about your offerings and your services, and really see if there's a way to take advantage of some areas that they may have expertise that you were unaware of. And that could build up your relationship with them and allow them to potentially have show more value or cost savings in the future as a result of the bigger business or the better business. So again, process mapping it's a pretty specific example. If you wanted more details on it or wanted to learn more about it, it is a Six Sigma tool. It's really just called the SIPOC, SIPOC. And that's really a place where, if you want to, again, go do additional research, you can certainly look on your own to learn more about process mapping that might work better for you. So if you go through the whole idea of understanding, how you can be a better customer and get your suppliers in line, and you go through this whole thing with process mapping, and everything becomes a very well-structured, well-oiled machine. You and your suppliers, everything seems to be going well. What does that do for you? Like, what's the practical application? What could you do in a specific case where you've done all this, and what could be the outcome? And again, for my logistics background, one of the things that I've tried to help coach some companies on is understanding how to be a shipper of choice. And so, I was kind of being more general earlier about what you can do to make yourself a better customer to your supplier. But specifically, if you're looking at the logistics world, or looking at an LTL situation, so less than truckload, you have as a shipper, you don't want to have any disruption. You want on-time deliveries. You want low cost, damage-free, and a slew of other things that would ideally go into your overall logistics network and down a notch into your LTL network. And that's all fine and dandy, but if you really just strip it down to what the goals of the carrier are, they just want the right shipper. They have a valuable commodity, and what they're basically trying to do is find the best shipper to utilize that commodity. And the commodity that I'm speaking of is space. the back of a truck, the trailer, the area where you're loading your freight, it's space. That's their commodity. And if you're sitting there and thinking to yourself that I'm just going to hammer this company, I want low cost, low cost, low cost. Well, what's their incentive? Because in general, there's a finite amount of space within the LTL network. And why would they want your freight if there's somebody else down the street that has, done a lot of internal optimization and tools, and you can kind of see some of those things on the right, and they're willing to, to pay a little bit more, and they're just better at what they do. It's like, well, I guess you're right. There is no reason for you to take my freight. So going through the exercise with a supplier, having those frequent conversations, learning from them, figuring out ways that you internally can optimize your ways of doing things, like effectively labeling freight, safely and adequately packaging the freight, accurate descriptions of the freight, understanding standardizing dimensions, using high quality pallets, ample lead time, flexibility on your end, and clean, safe, and good working environments for when the drivers show up. And I mean that list could go on and on and on. But that's just a way to, if you are trying to do your best to be a shipper that is thinking about the carriers when they come in and the relationship that you have, that's going to give them all the more incentive to want to work with you, because again, they know that what they have is valuable. And at some point, at low cost, they just can't do it anymore. Carriers are becoming much more in tune with their operating ratios and what they're going to need to be able to do to make a profit. And so just because you paid one thing one year doesn't mean you can pay the next year, then less the next year, and less and less and less. That's just not a good business model for those carriers. Now, if you could become better at what you do, more efficient in your processes and procedures, and they are able to then shift a little bit of their operating ratio factors, because again, you're allowing them to be more efficient, that the driver isn't showing up and waiting for 45 minutes to have the first pallet loaded on. Like, well, that comes into play for their operating ratio. So those little things that you can do, then they start maybe have a little bit of wiggle room on the back end to start negotiating costs that might be a little bit more advantageous for you. But it's not until you're willing to look at yourself and do the things and work with them and build that relationship that you could start to have those conversations. Because if you just come in guns blazing at the beginning and say, we want our costs lowered, they can just walk out the door and say, sorry, we'll just go find somebody else. And it's a real possibility. I know that in the logistics world, and I would imagine that it could be the case in many other categories as well. So that practical application falls into kind of this overall thing, and this is the whole name of this presentation has to talk about cost reduction. And really, what we start looking at are the cost reduction negotiation points. And really, instead of just looking at it as true cost reduction, we look at it as ways to optimize as a result of the efficiencies and the processes and procedures that you've improved upon along the way. And when you can start talking with a supplier that you have, or you maybe is a new supplier, there are many other things that you can look at than this, but the ones that jump out, if you want to start talking about ways to optimize, because you've talked about this and each other, what's the right contract length for you? Is 12 months still good? Can we sit there and talk about pre-negotiated extensions? Does it make sense to go to 3 years? What if we go to 3 years? What kind of incentives can you give on that front? You could look at those future cost increases with caps potentially, because that next year inflation costs will go up, but if you can mitigate that cost increase, normally they might say it's 8%, but it maybe negotiate it to 3%. Well, I mean, that's still going to come out better for you in the long run. So you can have those kind of conversations. You can start talking about maybe improved discounts or incentive tiers, because you've been able to kind of one of the other things on their volume thresholds. So you could, because you've done better, because your relationship makes more sense now, everybody's on the same page, then you can start maybe bringing more business to them as far as, more, you're buying more with them. Costs are going up. They like you. They're getting paid on time. So you start having these conversations that really allow you to talk about all this stuff, rebates and, maybe delivery costs or anything ancillary falls outside of those normal things. The key thing that I also want to throw on there is everything else, because cost reduction negotiations or any ways to optimize, we aren't just talking about cost here. This does still fall into value. You could quantify a lot of those things, that if you're able to put a rebate in place, then all right, well, we know that we could get money back. But if you start talking about ways to enhance your reporting, or you have more transparency with your supplier, you have a nice communication plan, you built out all these other things that allow you to really, as a company, figure out a way to define to get the best out of this whole situation. And the next thing that this kind of leads into, and you want to sit there and say, all right, well, we've done all this stuff. It doesn't really mean a whole lot if it's not really truly being, as an organization, identified and defined is what you would consider successful. So if you sat there and realized that, yes, we might have figured out a way to save a little bit of money, but in the grand scheme of things, you want to be able to go through this whole process, and when it's all said and done, take that supplier that you've been working with so much and figure out a way to define the success that you had with him or her and whomever was at the table with you. That then you can, as a company, start using those tools to build up your metrics as a whole, and apply that across the board in ways that maybe the logistics department isn't necessarily talking to the MRO department, who's not talking to facilities management, and they're not talking to the other division that's 10 states away. But if you can standardize a lot of this stuff, figure out ways that this is working for you, define how this is considered successful, and then share it internally, you can end up as a company kind of building on that synergy and allowing for an overall success that, again, goes beyond just your cost reduction negotiations, but defines a true value as a company as a whole. So I believe that the next slide is just simply this conclusion piece, which it's understanding the partnership, and part of this I kind of was touching on with that success piece. But really, what you want to look at this as more than anything is that peace of mind that you're getting the most out of your supplier, but also that peace of mind that you're not doing something that is outside the playbook. You want to be a partner in the conversation, collaborating, understand the performance, planning, your teamwork, synergy. These are all words that I've been saying throughout this whole presentation. And the second to last thing down there is that success model. What is success? How does this tie into your company? And how do you make it so the relationship with a supplier is a win-win? Don't have it be completely one-sided, because it's just not going to be fair to the other party. And it's going to cause for an awkward partnership along the way. So, all this conversation, all these tools, and all these little things that I try to throw in here today is really to focus on word partnership and what are the things that you can do to drive value, which would lead to success. So I believe that is it for me. Would like to thank everyone for their time. Appreciate the willingness to hop on and listen to me talk. So I will then turn that back over to any Q&A over to Kathy.
Okay, we do have one question. Can you share an example of a customer who turned a poor supplier or perhaps other business need because of the implementation of the SRM program?
A specific example where somebody, might have had a bad, so there's a situation that actually came up recently where a client of ours, they have a lot of different facilities scattered throughout the United States. They have, in the category that we were working on was multifunctional devices and their printers and copiers. And they have a lot of them all scattered throughout, again, the country in many different locations. And there was nobody really on their side that had owned the relationship with the company that was responsible for, they weren't even really managing the whole system. There was some managed print services there. But, when it came down to trying to figure out ways to be more efficient and ways to save the company money, their vendor had a lot of thoughts and ideas. They kept on trying to present them stuff. They kept on trying to sit there and say, hey, we have an idea where you can consolidate here, or you can repurpose there, or allow us to do this in this location. And it can save you when they come in with numbers and let them, hey, save $100 a month or save $1,000 a month, whatever the case may be. They wanted to build that relationship, but there was nobody at the the corporate level or the headquarters level that managed the relationship. And so it would basically either fall on deaf ears, or people would hear it, but there was nobody that could make the decision to implement anything. And one of the keys that we did is when Corcentric, when we came in, was we didn't just suggest to them, here is the best course of action. One of the first things that we wanted to establish with them is, internally, you need to figure out somebody to manage this relationship. Who is going to be the person responsible for the more day-to-day activities and making these decisions and owning the relationship moving forward? Because until then, all of the work that we can do and anything that we might do before we leave as the consultant could just end up falling completely apart if there's nobody there to maintain what was established. And so that was one of the key pieces that we did. And after we left, I mean, this was very recently, just a couple of weeks ago, our contract ended. But they are now at a point where they are going to use this company to really not only manage their entire network, but use them as a tool for optimization and cost reduction. So they finally were able to get the right buy-in, and they had made some hires that were important in that process. They have people that were finally listening, and it's really going to turn out well for them in the future.
Oh, thank you. Okay, another question just came in. When you are process mapping, do you see that as a procurement function solely you incorporate your internal clients as well?
You certainly can. I mean, process mapping is not a tool that has to be exclusive for outdoor or for outside suppliers or anything like that. I mean, it's kind of I mean, I would say it's probably a little more common thing to do out there, but again, I mean, it could be literally, like I mentioned, that process maps can be applied to anything from the travels of an invoice or the flow of materials, and that's an internal process. So if you sit there and want to, figure out, where you are going internally with a lot of what you're doing, you could certainly use that internally. I mean, because you use that to gauge, your own team's performance, or you could use it to figure out the quality of the work life and work design, and definitely use that as an internal function as well.
Oh, thank you. Okay, and a few people wanted to know if you would be able to share the presentation as well.
Absolutely. I will send it to you, Kathy, after we wrap up here, and you can feel free to distribute it as needed.
Okay, no problem. Oh, wait, another question just came in. Other than spend, how else would you recommend easily categorizing and identifying priority suppliers that will yield potentially highest value through relationship building?
So other than spend, I guess it kind of depends on who you talk to. The different departments are going to have different key elements that are factoring to the conversation. So if you think about, like, in the logistics world, you sit there and say, well, this carrier is now cheaper than who we had in place. Well, what we didn't factor in is it's now going to take an extra day for the freight to get to one of our top 2 customers down in Texas. Like, well, okay, well, that's going to be a problem. And 3 months down the road, they don't like that, and you lose them as a customer. So I would say that not only with spend, I would think one of the key things that you have to be able to understand is the consistency with the delivery element, and it doesn't have to be you delivering someplace. It could be their delivery on time, and it's because it's allowing your overall supply chain. And again, I'm focusing kind of on that supply chain, whether it be inbound or outbound. But one of the really key things that I hear a lot in that industry is the ability for a company to be predictable and reliable in what they do and how they do it. And so any way that you're able to do that with a pattern that is able to be recognized by not only your maybe your carriers, but also your suppliers or your clients or customers, whatever the case may be, it allows them to plan a lot better, and taking out that risk element that everything seems to kind of flow in place. So other than spend, it's really that the managing the disruption or the potential for disruption, and a lot of it just has to do with your ability to be predictable and reliable in your services.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions, but I would like to close out the session today by thanking you, Joe, for a very informative presentation um, today, and also to our audience, and especially those who were able to participate by sending in a question. We always appreciate that during these programs. We will be sending out a short survey, so please be sure to complete it because we want to know what future topics are you looking to hear about, because we are planning the balance of the year from August till December, and we are providing free programs for all of our ISM members. So thank you again. There is something in the chat bar, so let me just see what that is. Oh, yes. Okay. Someone was just looking for a copy of the PowerPoint as well. So we will definitely get that over to everybody with the recording and, of course, your continuing education hour for today's program. And again, look for future emails on additional webinars we're going to be running. And I hope everybody has a great day. And thank you for joining us.